As president of the International March of the Living, I'm honored to have the privilege of introducing a presentation which I hope each of you will find not only engaging and informative, but quite emotional as well. As we approach the Pesach season, we recall that we are commanded each year to tell and retell the story of our exodus from Egypt. We at International March of the Living are in the same way committed to tell and retell the story of the Shoah, so that future generations will learn the lessons of survival from those who lived through the darkest hours of Jewish history. It is a mission which we have held dear since our inception in 1988, as we have continued to educate participants from over 40 countries around the globe. It is a mission we continue to uphold, even in this new and challenging virtual world in which we are now living. As you will hear in the words of Abraham Goldberg himself and the promise he made to his mother the last time he saw her, his mission to live his life as a torchbearer of memory, a teller of the truthful recount of history, is proof that each of us can make a profound difference should we choose to do so. It is the very mantra of the International March of the Living, and we treasure survivors such as Mr. Goldberg, who educate our participants and prepare them to become witnesses of and for the witnesses. His message of memory and his message of hope give those fortunate enough to listen to his story, remember his words, and heed his lessons, a clear preparatory guide to remember that each of us must remember and never, ever forget. On behalf of the Board of Directors of the International March of the Living, I personally thank March of the Living Australia President Cedric Geffen and the Goldberg family for this most inspirational program. I wish good health, safety from harm, and a Chag Pesach Sameach to each of you.
I was born in Poland, Lodz. My name is Abram Goldberg. I was the youngest of 4 siblings. I had 3 sisters. I was the only boy. My father was born in 1888, and at the early age of year 12, he joined the socialist movement of the Bund. It was the Jewish socialist organization, and till the day he was murdered by the Nazis, by the Germans, in 1942. Out of nearly 700,000 inhabitants, a third of the population of Lodz was Jewish. So it was a very vibrant Jewish community, and all aspects of normal cultural, political life. And this came to an abrupt end with the outbreak of the war. With the outbreak of the war on the 1st of September 1939, it was a Friday, 5 o'clock in the morning, we could hear the first bomb fell on the Lodz railway yard. And this was the only bombing what occurred in Lodz. And only 7 days afterwards, the following Friday, Germans marched into the city of Lodz. And of course, immediately, life changed completely. All those laws what were implemented in Germany from 33 to 39 applied immediately to the Jews of Lodz. It meant that we were put outside the law. And they did drag us out, male or female, young or old, from the houses for all kinds of work, of course without payment. And usually many did not return late in the evening. The ones who returned were always black and blue for the beatings I received. We had to hand in all valuables. Firstly, all cameras and radios. It was not only what Jews had to hand in, even Poles had to hand in radios. And of course, Jews were not allowed back to the places of employment. Synagogues were burned down. You see, after a short while, we had to put on, they forced us to put on a yellow armband. Only way we could go out was through the wires. And those wires, the barbed wire was guarded by the German Schutzpolizei. And those who guarded the ghetto very often did amuse themselves, took off the rifle and make men or women or a child a moving target. And so just aimed and shot. Many people were murdered that way. Once we were enclosed in the ghetto, life became impossible. The hunger was so great. In 1940, in middle of 1940, the Bund organized the first protest, and people went out into a demonstration in ghetto. A few people were wounded, and we realized immediately that if we would dare again to openly protest, and we realized the consequences will be too great, so we abandoned this part of our resistance. Everything had to be done in a different way. Our resistance had to be different. So as we called it at the time, and today, it's a passive resistance. And our passive resistance meant to encourage the Jews of the ghetto to hold out. So after 1941, when schooling was forbidden, so we organized schooling for children as long as they were in ghetto. In small groups, we organized reading groups. We collected books in small libraries. What was every illegal work was under the threat of death. Not only for the person who will be caught, but families and much more, because the Nazis employed collective responsibility. And so we organized those reading groups. We read the books, we discussed those books, we organized recitals, theatrical plays, our cultural life. And as long as they didn't kill us physically, we never contemplated in giving up. Before 1942, when there was the biggest action in ghetto, it was called the Gesperre. I've lost my entire family then. And as far as I remember, around 50 cousins, uncles, grandparents, aunties. So I was left with my mother. Before the liquidation of the Lodz ghetto, I was left with my mother. I was then only with my mother. And I, as I was in the underground, and I was from the people who knew, who went to know what's happening to us, I went into hiding, and I was able to hide out for 4 weeks. And after 4 weeks, my mother, she was in her early 50s, couldn't take it any longer, because I prepared some hiding places beforehand in attics, in bunkers, concealed, of course, and we sometimes had to change those hiding places on the run. And my mother wasn't capable of doing it any longer. She was emaciated, physically very weak, and she came out with a proposition that I should go on hiding and she will present herself for deportation. I couldn't let my mother go on her own. I was 19 years old at the time, and I did think that maybe when we arrive, and I knew where we're going, to Birkenau, to Auschwitz, I will be able to help my mother. But of course, it was to no avail. On arrival, immediately on arrival, when those heavy doors were flung open, and the scream of the SS, everybody out, men one side, women on the other side, women and children on the other side. And those precious moments, my mother was able to tell me that, Abram, you should do everything humanly possible to survive. And when you will survive, wherever you will be, wherever you will find yourself, you should tell people what was happening to us and what was done to us. Because by knowing, people will be able to prevent that anything like this will never happen again to anyone. And only a short while afterwards, I lost the last member of my family in the gas chambers of Birkenau. When I was driven to the bath, I was allowed only my shoe and my belt. If your shoe were too good, it was taken away and you were given wooden clog. Fortunately, I had very good shoes, and those shoes were not taken away. And this is particularly later on, it kept me warm for all the next 9 months. And I was there for over 3 months. And as I always say, I was in hell for 3 months. You can imagine when you saw 24 hours the chimneys of the crematoriums belching out smoke. The chimneys of, it was terrible, and you could smell the burning flesh, because if the crematoriums couldn't cope, so I burned the people on pyres. So I usually made with us gymnastics, I said, for our goods. And usually so I choose a day where it was raining, it was very muddy. And so I made with us for an hour or more. We couldn't tell the time, but to us it did sound like an eternity. And you can imagine we had to sit down, push-ups, and sometimes they even ask us to take off the belt and spread it across our hands, and any belt who fell off will be beaten up. So and this is what happened. How can, when you have a belt across you, a leather belt, it had to fall off. So one who was unlucky and he picked, he had a beating sometime to death. And then, well, on a couple of occasions, well, we had to line up, so I again choose a couple of hundred, and supposed to be work. It wasn't actual work. So I made us carry stones from one end to the other, on the run, for many hours, and for anybody who fell behind, they clubbed to death. Well, my survival is now 3 Jewish generations. Ourselves, my children, and my grandchildren. We all should remember that we all belong to the same human race. No difference of the color of our skin, or the shape of our eyes, our ethnic or religious background. What hurts one human being hurts also another. And you should always respect other people with what are a bit different than yourself. Hitler came to power on those pretenses and on those racial discriminative slogans that of a superior race. No one of us is superior to another human being. We are different, but not superior.
My first question that I'm going to pose to Abe is as follows. Abe, over the years, you've been involved in so many different community affairs. You've become a community activist. I hope you don't mind if I call you that. You were a community activist from a very, very young age. And so my question to you is, what would you say were the underlying factors that instilled in you this passion and drive to be involved in so many different aspects of Jewish community life?
Well, I was born into a political family. So at a very early age, as far as I remember, when I was 5 years old, when the discussions in our home were hot political discussion, I was interested what the adults talking about. Of course, I didn't understand much of it, but I was interested. And this when it actually, I started to focus on the communal life at the age of 5. You see, till the outbreak of the war. Well, and then when we were under Nazi occupation, and when we headed into the ghetto of Lodz, and as a young boy at the age of 9, I was already in a youth movement. In the Bund, what was called the Skip. And then I was also a member of a sport club, what was called the Morgenstern. And I became a junior champion gymnast, and I became also a junior champion table tennis player, and I participated in a lot of sport, also in activities. And I was taught by my father, never run from those bullies. This was my first introduction, actually, that I have to stand up to injustices. And to this day, at my tender 96 years of age, I am still doing the same thing. I will never do a step backward.
Absolutely. And so if we take that activism that started from the tender age of 5 and obviously was part and parcel of your upbringing.
Yes.
How do you think that, or how did that activism manifest itself whilst you were in the Lodz ghetto and thereafter in Auschwitz?
Well, in the ghetto, with the Bund had this underground. And I belonged to the youth movement in the underground. And we had our regular meetings. We had cultural meetings. We had, for example, we had reading groups meetings. We had our underground, how we should behave also during those darkest days in Jewish history. So, well, I become very, very, very active in this underground. And, well, and let me tell you, my friend, Bonovine, who was, the family was also a family friend. And in the ghetto, we lived next door to each other. My family, not only myself, my mother and my father. And the Venus were the father, mother, Bonovine, and his auntie. and we were very close. And of course, one of Wiener, just before the outbreak of the war, he finished his metal engineering degree in evening courses. So when the ghetto was established and the factories were erected, metal factory, he was made our foreman. And he took me in, and I became, at the age of 16, I became his deputy foreman, because he had to be absent on many occasions, and I had to cover up for him. So I was taught by my father, and I was taught in the organization how to behave and how to react to certain situations. And to this day, I'm the same. I have never changed. And this where I always had my upbringing. For example, well, my grandfather, my father's father, he was a teacher of religion. He had a Heide. And at the age of 3, my Saida wanted me to go to Heide. I didn't like it. And my father was able to persuade me to go. Well, I didn't have a choice, so I went. But then for the next 3 years, I went quite willingly. Why? Because I was blind. My Zaida was very happy with his grandson that he's going to Heide. So when we finished from 9 to 2 o'clock, and after 2 o'clock, he escorted me to the door. And well, and he gave me 5 groschen. So they 5 groschen, I could buy chocolate, I could buy ice cream. So and they told me not to tell my Bubba, my grandmother. But well, even at this tender age, I realized that I have to keep my mouth shut. Then my brother took over, and she escorted me home. And when before we reached our home, she gave me also 5 groschen, not to tell the Manzaida. My beginning of I was taught and learned how to keep my mouth shut.
That's a very, very good attribute. And being able to benefit from this side and from this side, to play both sides is a very important attribute. And I'm sure that served you well, both in the ghetto and thereafter.
Well, yes, and and I was interested in politics, and well, you wouldn't believe it. I wanted to become a politician, and I'm happy that I didn't.
We're very happy you didn't either. Abe, so this same sense of communal responsibility has been the calling that you have dedicated your life to ever since.
Yes.
One of the many intriguing and fascinating aspects of your life that I recall you sharing with the students on March of the Living and elsewhere is the story about how you and your lifelong friend, as you mentioned, fellow survivor and fellow founder of the JHC, Bonavina, hid and buried artifacts from those times in the ghetto, and you had the foresight and the courage and the conviction after the war to travel back to Poland and to retrieve these artifacts and bring them back to Melbourne with you. And if you can just tell us a little bit about this story, I really would appreciate that. Thank you.
I and Bono did sit down. We considered what we can do. So we came to the conclusion where we had to collect written, what happened written in Yiddish and in Polish, where our experiences. We collected any artifacts, what was actually created in the ghetto, like the posters on the wall, like, for example, the bread ration card, like my passport to work in the factory, in Bernos and others, and throughout the year of the existence of the ghetto, because this was the first actually enclosed ghetto. There was the Piotr ghetto, what was a bit earlier, but was not similar to the Lodz ghetto. And we started to collect. And to those 4 years being in ghetto, we collected a lot of documents. And also, the first decree was for the Jews, not only Jews, to hand in the radios in the cameras. Well, so people had hand in the radios who had the radio. A lot didn't want to hand in, so I smashed it up. They helped us later. And this actually began. And
So those artifacts, how did you preserve them? What did you do with them?
oh, well, of course, we did hide them. And by 1944, we realized that we had to be hidden. So we had 2 metal boxes. And also with the help of an electrical engineer, we were Bono and the metal engineer in the metal factory, but we could help to construct a receiving set. And it was ready by the end of 1942. And well, one of those radios was hidden in the ghetto by the Wechsler family. The Wechsler family was our friends. They were also Bundists. I had a receiving set also similar, and we copied it according to them.
And where did you hide those 2 metal cases?
I will come to it. You see, and it was hidden in different places. In 1944, and realized the ghetto is going to be liquidated. June 1944. Well, I'm not going to go into detail, but the deportation started in August 1944. So we did seal those 2 boxes. We hide those 2 boxes. One where we were living, like I said, it was a Polish area. There were gardens, and there were trees. One we dug a deep hole and we put 1 box in it. It was the radio, other documents. In the second box, we did hide maybe 50 meters away near the Polish latrines. You can imagine those latrines in August 1944, they were full. And when the ghetto was liquidated, it was probably smelling a mile away. And when those dug and find the box, this is how we estimated that when I dug it out, and I saw a metal box with a lock on it, I was sure I got a fortune. So I got Jews that hide. When I piled it probably open and saw what is there, that something, why is here, why is there, and some written in Yiddish papers, and this. So I went probably and checked it out and scrap it. But I didn't go near the 1 box, what we did actually buried near the latrine. In this box, I was able to retrieve in 1945, and I returned when I was liberated to Deutsch.
Amazing story. And what happened to those artifacts once you found them? You brought them with you to Melbourne?
Well, no, well, it's not so simple. I was liberated actually on the 2nd of May, 1945, by the American Army, over 100 kilometers from Berlin. The camp was called Berlin. It was a like labor camp, but not actually for Jews. There were all different nationalities from Europe. We were squeezed in maybe 150 prisoners, Jewish prisoners. And when we were liberated on the 2nd of May, I've always described it. I was lucky always. I was not sick. I was emaciated, physically weak. My weight was 29 kilos at the time of liberation, but I was not sick. It didn't take me long to gain some strength. So I had to return to Poland. I didn't wait to hear, Bono did survive. Yeah, he did survive. We spent the first 2 months in a hospital in Austria. On arrival to Lodz after this travel, what took me 2.5 weeks practically, being riding on the top, on the roof of the trains. I'm arriving to lodge. When I came down, I met some people I knew. So they told me the Bund is already organizing. And so they told me where the Bund got, because before the outbreak of the war, this was the school, the middle school, the Yiddish primary school. So I went there, and I met a friend what I knew, what came back also. We were from the first who arrived back to lodge after the war. And then I took a couple of friends from there. And the first thing what I did with those two friends, we went to look for the boxes. And then when I discovered one box, the box was not there, and the other one. I was very elated. When we opened it, we saw what was there.
So despite everything that you went through, despite all the hardship, despite everything, you went back and you kept on fighting, you kept on being an activist, you kept on making sure that you could help those that couldn't possibly help themselves, etc., etc. Eventually, you made it to Australia and you became involved and a major player in the Australian community. And I'm going to jump a few years ahead because we could continue talking about the Kadima and the Jewish Holocaust Center, etc., etc. But I'm going to jump, if you don't mind, to what made you, after so many years, decide that it was important for you to go back to Poland with students on March of the Living and talk to them in situ, on the ground, about your experiences during the war.
After being transported day and night those cattle train, and we arrived to Auschwitz, Birkenau, and those heavy doors were flying open, the scream of the barking dogs, everybody out, men one side, women and children the other side. And those few precious moments when I was still together to my mother. She was able to whisper in my ear, she said, Abram, you should do everything humanly possible to survive. She knew she was not going to survive. When you will survive, you should tell the world what actually happened, because by knowing, people will be able to prevent such atrocities will never be repeated anywhere in the world. And this was the last word to me. And when Mengele conducted the selection, his button didn't point at me, pointed from left, right, behind me. It didn't point. That's why I'm saying my survival is 99% of luck. Of course, I did a lot to survive. And when, after taking everything away from me, I was only allowed to keep my shoes and belt. Both the hair on our body was shaved. And after the shower, when they throw a pair of trousers, what was too big, too long for me, and a jacket, no underwear, nothing, I was driven to the heart of this huge death complex, what was called the Gypsy Camp. And there I spent nearly 3 months. So I made it because those words of my mother did ring in my head constantly.
Ultimately, those last words from your mother have stuck with you ever since, and that is what has driven your mission ever since, to make sure that everybody knows what happened so that it doesn't happen again.
Yes, and this gave me strength to endure what I saw, I experienced, and I have a lot of things to tell again when being in Germany about liberation. But what I will tell you about liberation, the Americans took 200 of those skeleton bodies. There was not many Jews amongst them, but most of them non-Jews. And so I took them to the nearest city, what was approximately 4 kilometers away. The city was called Ludwigslust. The Germans of the city of Ludwigslust had to walk around in a park. It's the middle of the city or a park, around those 200 bodies. And the chaplain of the American 82nd Airborne Division had a speech with them. And I have this speech. Usually I'm presenting it, but every time I'm speaking to school, as evidence, part of my experiences, and just well after liberation. Well, and yes, and what I wanted also to tell, it didn't pass a day in all those years that I'm not thinking, and I have all those memories every day of my life. I'm not exaggerating. And I said, I'm going to do what it will be possible for me to do. So it's right away when I went illegal to Belgium with my friend, it's another story. You see, we were immediately active. And then when we went from Belgium to Australia, my friend went to Canada, you see, and well, and on arrival, to this day, not one single day left me. And I said, I have to do the promise what I gave on the most sacred place in the gypsy camp in Birkenau. And
Yep.
even today, at my age, I'm still on the executive of the Holocaust Museum. I was one of the founders of the Yiddish primary day school in Australia, the Sholem Aleichem school, where our daughter is now the principal. And my son, Charlie, is our guidance center. And 3 generations, like you mentioned before, went on the March of the Building. You see, I was from those people. We saw those people in the beginning in Australia. Polish Jews said we should never go back to Poland. I said, no, we have to go back because there are the places where 3 million of Polish Jews were murdered. And those other Jews were murdered on those, so nearly 5 million were murdered in Poland in other ways or in Russia. We should not let forget. We should always remember the Yiddish and Jewish culture in Poland, what we were able to do on so many difficulties, what we had to face in pre-war Poland and before under occupation from Tsarist Russia. And here we are. We have to see to it and do everything possible. And when the Jewish Holocaust Center was erected, there was between the 2 Jewish organizations, the Kadima, Jewish National Library, and the Polish Federation of Polish Jews. Well, and then I was, in 88, I was sent as a delegate from the Kadima to the Jewish Holocaust Museum, and I'm still on the committee since then.
Fantastic. It's unbelievable. But I'm going to now focus, I'm going to give you a chance to catch your breath, Abe, and I'm going to talk to Charlie and Daniel now for a moment. And I will never forget the wonderful, the honor and the privilege to have accompanied the 3 of you on that March of the Living delegation in 2011. So I'm going to ask Charlie and Daniel just to even go back a little bit further back before March of the Living. So your father, your Zayda, Abe, basically has portrayed how not a day has passed in his life where Yiddishkeit, the story of what the Jewish people have gone through in Poland, what happened, and the continuity thereafter, and striving for a better world going forward. What are your first memories of growing up with a survivor father or survivor grandfather and grandmother? What was that like in the home from a very, very young age?
My first memories of the Holocaust, I was probably 4 years old, and we were living in Auburn, and Mum would take me to the local kindergarten, which was in a church hall. And when I was about 4, I realised all the other children were being picked up by their grandparents quite often. So I just turned around as a innocent 4-year-old and asked my mother, where are my grandparents? And she got very upset, a few tears came, and she explained what happened. So from that was when I became aware of it, and I was always asking, always questioning, asking Dad about his experiences, and he was always telling me quite honestly and out there. And when I was about 10, I asked him one day, I said, do you hate the Germans? And he looked at me and he got this stern look on his face, and the finger came out, and I knew I was in trouble, or sort of in trouble. And he said, don't you ever use that word again. And I said, what word? And he said, hate. And I said, what do you mean? He said, once you give in to that emotion, what is it that you become? And that's been a keystone in my upbringing, very much so. And he also taught me the same thing that his dad taught him. Always go forward, don't run away from anything. Go forward and stick up for yourself and for what you know is right. And that's been one of the major building blocks of how I've faced my life, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my earliest memories, so I went to Sholmalachem College as well for kindergarten and primary school, and Zeta would often pick me up afterwards, after he would spend the day at the Holocaust Centre around the corner. And then my first well, it just seems like it's always sort of been a constant, Holocaust remembrance has sort of been a constant in my life. I don't really remember the first sort of time that I was aware of it, but, you know, Zeta would take me after he'd pick me up from school. We'd go into the Holocaust Centre. He would have to fix up some paperwork or go get something that he forgot, or, you know, clean up, lock up for the day. So I remember walking through the empty museum and into the office and meeting all the other guides, and I guess also just going over to Bubba and Zeta's house, lots of their friends as well, and just the stories that I heard my grandparents and their friends talk about, photos of their friends overseas, the ones that Zeta was talking about earlier, who had all these experiences with post-war. Yeah, so they're the earliest memories, and I think also the organisations that I'm involved with because of Zeta and Dad really put Holocaust remembrance in as a very important part of the things that they do. So the Bund and Skiff in Melbourne, putting on, they have very important commemorations throughout the year and on their summer camps, and also at the school, Sholmalachem College. It's something that I always remember being a very solemn but special day that, you know, was a constant throughout my life.
Fantastic. So there really is a clear pathway where this is a matter of passing from one generation to the next generation. We're coming up to Passover now, and one of the central themes of the Haggadah is the fact that the purpose of sitting together with one's family and going through the Haggadah and talking about the experiences of what occurred so many years back in Egypt, and passing that on to the next generation is one of the cornerstone, I think, learnings, not only on Passover, but in Jewish life in general, that one learns from one's parents, one learns from one's grandparents, and that is passed on from one generation to the other. And taking that theme of passing on from one generation to another, I'm just going to try and bring you back to that experience on March of the Living, where the three of you were together. And I'd like to ask the three of you, what do you feel about that occasion? How did that impact you? How important was it? What sort of feelings did you have when you were there? And I know that Charlie, in your case, I think you had been to Poland with your dad before, etc. But on the other hand, this was an opportunity to be there 3 generations. And so if I can ask you, what made that occasion of being able to be there 3 generations together so special for you?
Well, first and foremost, it was to me it's a symbolization of victory over good over evil, of having 3 generations of our people who the Nazis tried to eradicate and eliminate, standing there at the sites of our greatest losses and the most horrible of horrible. It's a victory for humanity in that respect. And being able to be there with my father and my son, it became very emotional at times. I mean, there's some incredibly moving moments, and it's something that we hope will be continued into the future, because it's something that we cannot afford to lose.
Yep. Abe, what did it mean? What did it mean for you to have your son and your grandson there with you?
Well, I usually say, with the survival of myself and my wife, we have now 3, 4th generation of Jews. This is my people's victory. And this I'm also telling to tens of thousands of non-Jews. And not only Jews, but also of humanity. Well, it is one the first time Charlie was in Auschwitz. It was the second time when he was in Auschwitz.
Yeah.
We went also because of other reason. We also have family there with my wife Tesha also.
Yep. Daniel, how did you feel about that experience of being able to be there together with your Zayda and your father?
I think in a way, it felt like it was sort of a natural sort of progression of how my life had been sort of leading up to having this experience. Like I was talking about before, it being sort of a Holocaust remembrance being sort of a whole constant in my life. And I think, you know, my cousins also, when they were younger, went to Poland with Zayda as well. And I think it was always expected that I was going to have this experience at one point, but I guess I never really thought that it would happen in the way it did, which was an incredible, like Dad said, it was an incredible experience and just so moving. And to be able to share all these, this Zayda's story with all the other people my age that were there, it was really special. And I think there were lots of moving memories that that I'll never forget from the time that we were in Poland together.
Without putting you on the spot, can you remember something specific that one of those moving memories? Because I've got some that I'd like to share with you, but let's hear from you what they were.
I think it was Belzec.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that was a moving day for everyone in general. Everything sort of converged into making it a really emotional day for everyone. I think it was quite late on in the trip, so I think everyone was a bit emotionally exhausted. We'd seen so much, heard so much, and on top of that, I guess it was a really emotional memorial there as well.
Absolutely.
And
if I may ask, can you just sort of describe what occurred there at Belzec that's so memorable?
Oh, for us at least, we all gathered together and hugged, and we sang the Partisano hymn. And yeah, it's just something that I think about every time we sing it now.
Absolutely. Charlie?
It was a very moving moment because, as I said, I grew up with the Holocaust, and Dad's always been open and telling me a lot about what was happening. But that was really the first time I saw the emotional impact on Dad. It was heart-wrenching, I must say. And just even talking about it now, I get emotional about it. But yeah, it was something extremely special, as was the singing of the Partisan. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, as obviously I'm not a family member, but I am a family member. I believe I'm a family member, and so are the family of March of the Living, everybody that was there. I don't believe that those people who were there on that trip will ever forget it. And just for the audience, I'll explain a little bit more in detail, if I may. And that is, we just visited the memorial. We'd come out of the silence room, which is very deep underneath the ground at Belzet's, and we gathered in the area before you sort of enter into the memorial, and we were there about 70 strong, young adults, school teenagers, boys and girls, educators, auxiliary staff, and Abe, our survivor, and there were other survivors with us on that. We joined arms, and as you say, we sang the partisan song, hymn, and honestly, from my perspective, and I would say this without a shadow of a doubt, on all the 7 delegations that I've been on March of the Living, that will always stick in my mind as being incredibly moving and incredibly uplifting in so many ways, by virtue of the fact that here we had a survivor, his son, his grandson, paying homage to the partisans, paying homage to those who had gone before us and to those that are no longer with us, and paying homage to the fact that we shared this victory by virtue of the fact that the 3 of you were there together with all the others that were there during that program. So yes, that will be a memory that will last in so many people's minds. And that brings me on to another question that I'm going to put to all of you, and that is, despite all the efforts that we put into Holocaust memorialization, into talking about the fact that we are committed to improving the world for everyone, to making this a better place for everyone, to try and rid the world of hatred and injustice and intolerance, etc., we see the ugly head of these things occurring time and time again. And my question to you is, do you believe in any way that there is a chance that Holocaust memorialization, going into the future, looking at the younger generation now coming up, that it's going to be something that is going to be possibly forgotten or not memorialized in the same way? Is there a risk that may occur?
Look, there's always a risk, but there's always hope. And we've all got a message to pass on. And the only message we can pass on, which is the truth, and the living truth is sitting right next to me, has to be passed on. And we have to also not only fight ignorance, but there's a trend in modern present day society of trivialization of the Holocaust. And that's, whenever you encounter that, you've got to stand up and speak up. And you have to make your voice heard. And if enough voices are raised, it should change things. But we have to be very vigilant about it. And that's part of our mission as well.
Absolutely.
And I think, things will change in our remembrance of the Holocaust. Unfortunately, it's just the way it is, that eventually there won't be the living connection to the Holocaust anymore. And even the people, if we're looking however far down the track, there won't be anyone who has connections to those living memories. So it's about, and it's all the hard work that, people like Zeta and Dad have been doing these years, and putting all these excellent things in place and institutions in place to try and keep this memory alive as best and as most impactful as possible for those who do go through places like the Holocaust Centre. So I think it's important that these sort of organisations and institutions exist, and we look at ways that Holocaust remembrance is done in a way that is easy to understand, and also easy for people to feel like it's related to them, and that it's relevant to them, even if they might not have been there or know someone who was there. Because yeah, if it doesn't apply to everyone, then things get lost along the way.
Abe, I'm going to ask you now, if I may. You can relate to that topic as well, but I think I want to draw this to a close. And I'd like you possibly to, if you can, just in summation, say, what is the legacy that you would like to see passed down for the coming generations?
Well, when we established the museum, we knew from the inception of the museum that we have to reach the young generation only through education. And to this day, I help to educate the younger generation. And when I'm finishing my testimonies, every time, and this is, well, thousands and thousands and thousands, I'm giving to the young people, mostly 95% non-Jewish. I tell them, we have to remember that there is no races. There is only one race. It's the human race. No different of the color of our skin or the shape of our eyes or the color of our hair. What has one human being has also another. And also remember that life is beautiful. Life is worth living. And I tell them, you should have priorities in your life. Now you are young, you're studying, you're going to school. Your priority is your schooling. And then when you will grow up, you have to always remember that not every day is going to be a sunny day in your life. There will be day what will be overcast. But always remember, after an overcast day, the sun will always shine again. And this I finish when my speech, and then it's question time.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the pre-recorded part has now ended. And as Abe quite correctly said, we're going to open it up now to question time and comments if anybody has. I'd like to call on Nina Bassett, if I may. Nina had a question. So Nina, we're going to unmute you, or you can unmute yourself. And if you wouldn't mind posing the question that you posed on the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Cedric, and thank you for an amazing presentation. I'm not sure that I remember the exact question I sent, but it was along the lines of Abe's talking about all humanity being the same and that we must honor that humanity in the light of the polarization of extremist views, in the light of the rising anti-Semitism, which is now reached 1933 levels. How hopeful can we be that that message of humanity will be understood widely, and how hopeful can we be that never again really will be never again?
Fantastic question. I'm going to pass that to Abe, if you would like to answer that.
Well, Nina, well, we met many times. Well, yes, I'm disappointed, of course, when I see what's going on now in the world. It pains me. But I always live in hope. And I have a hope for the future of our people and future for all mankind. Otherwise, well, it's not worth living. And it's up to you, young people, that you should see that those murderers never raise their ugly heads again. And it's up to you. When you see any injustice is being done, always speak out and stand up.
Thank you very much, Abe. I'd like to actually ask Daniel, I'm sorry to put you on the spot here at the back there, but as the third generation Goldberg that's present here, what are your views on that? How hopeful are you that that your generation is going to see a change?
Well, I think it's, yeah, I share Zayda's sentiments exactly. It's deeply disappointing to see, you know, what's happening around the world. But I think it seems like the youth are leading the way in trying to change things for the better for everyone. And I hope that the youth can lead this change. I think, as I said in the pre-recorded interview, all these programs and institutions that have been set up are so important as well. And the fact that they're there and available to be an educative tool to children and people of the future, I hope will avoid things like this happening again, and for people to really remember and never forget.
And I'm going to point the question even slightly more, and that is, do you feel that your generation is empowered enough to stand up for what you believe is right without being victimized or fear of victimization, etc., etc.?
Yeah, no, definitely. And there's so many great examples of it in our community. I mean, even if we look as broadly as things like the schools strike for climate, you can see how loudly that the youth can really shout and make themselves heard. And the youth within our own community and all the youth groups showing how much that they spread the message of change and of hope and of love, I think is really empowering, and something that the wider community should really be looking at and promoting and pushing those voices forward.
Fantastic, great to hear. I'd like now to move to another question, and we've got room for one more after this, but so if anybody else wants to put a question through, please just put it through in the chat.
My question was for Abe. Hi, Abe, and Charlie and Daniel. Lovely to see you there on Zoom. My question was, Abe, when you were working in the underground in the Lodge Ghetto, were you helped by non-Jewish Poles in the surrounding areas of the ghetto?
Yeah.
Well, you see, when we were in the ghetto, we were the only hermetically closed ghetto from all ghettos what existed in Poland. We were in the Third Reich. We were part of the Third Reich because Nazi Germany incorporated this part of Poland into Germany. So we couldn't have, because the Poles were also victimized there. Polish language was forbidden there. Polish intelligentsia were murdered, even clerics were murdered also. We should never forget this also.
Yes.
So we were outside, that the Poles were able to help even us because we had no possible contact. And also, this part of Poland, there was practically no Polish underground also. So it was very difficult to communicate. I will give you one example. A neighbor of mine in Bonos, a young boy, he was 18 years old, he was tall, blonde, and he would manage to cross the wires. Somehow he was picked up. He didn't have any documents. And we never heard of him again. This was impossible to escape. And we tried to contact also the outside Polish underground. It was not possible.
Thank you, Abe. I'm going to allow one more question because I do believe that we're probably overextending the time frame here. And that's a question from Danielle Kiriati. Danielle, if you'd like to unmute your mic, or if we can unmute, and then over to you. Go ahead.
Hi there, thanks for your talk. I'm very involved in fighting anti-Semitism on Facebook, and I just wanted to say that over the last, I don't know how many years, it's been 8 years or something that I've been fighting it, there have been some changes. Holocaust denial is not allowed anymore, although it still slips through. But I do feel that Nazi and extreme groups have felt an ability to gather and feel more power over the years. You know, years ago, you didn't have swastikas flying in the Bunnings shop or in Kmart and Southland. And I just think that young people who are easily influenced have been led into these kind of groups. What can we do about it?
Oh, well.
Social media change.
Well, let me believe. I believe in a democratic system, a freedom of expression. That freedom has also some limitations. And those hate propaganda shouldn't be permitted in any case, in any form. This doesn't mean that we're going to, we're going to have to limit the freedom of expression. But those hateful, if the people can't learn from the past what happened in the 30s, people will never learn.